Let's dive right into this explainer. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the ancient desert winds sweeping across the Nile. Imagine that perfect golden hour light casting these massive, dramatic shadows over the temples of a crumbling empire. Today, we are stepping right into the middle of that world to uncover the incredible rise and the utterly tragic fall of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. We're not just looking at a timeline today, we're unpacking an epic, cinematic saga of raw power, deep mystery, and ultimate survival.
Chapter 1. The Eternal Mystery. We're starting our journey by stepping straight back into a world of constantly shifting alliances and towering ambitions to confront a history that, honestly, still completely captivates us.
Just listen to this. More than 2,000 years after her death, Cleopatra remains one of the most fascinating women in history. Seriously, let that sink in for a moment. Entire civilizations have literally risen and fallen to dust, yet her name, it still commands the room.
So what is it about her? Why does the mystery of her life, and especially her death, still hook us so deeply? Well, because her story isn't just dusty ancient history. It's an absolute masterclass in political survival. It's a fiercely guarded legacy, and it all leads up to a dramatic, cliffhanger ending that historians are literally still debating today. We're caught in this endless curiosity loop, always trying to separate the real, breathing woman from the 2,000-year-old myth.
Chapter 2. A Kingdom in Crisis. To really understand Cleopatra, you absolutely have to understand the chaos she was born into.
She grew up right in the thick of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And guys, this was a time of massive violent political chaos and incredibly bitter rivalries inside her own royal family. It was ruthless. But here's the thing. Her real royal arsenal to survive all of this, it wasn't just her royal bloodline, it was her brain. Her exceptional intellect. She had a world-class education and a staggering mastery of languages. Get this, she was actually the very first Ptolemaic ruler to take the time to learn the Egyptian language, which meant she could speak directly to her own people. She didn't just inherit a throne, she was intellectually armed to the teeth to defend it.
Chapter 3. Alliances in Rome. But local intelligence was only going to get her so far. You can almost feel the tension in the room as Cleopatra realizes her struggling kingdom desperately needs outside help. So, she strategically shifts her gaze across the Mediterranean, looking directly toward the rising, unstoppable superpower of Rome.
And that brings us to the arrival of Julius Caesar. Cleopatra was facing exile, and she knew she had to get face-to-face with Caesar. But she couldn't exactly just walk through the front door, right? So, the legendary story goes that she had herself smuggled straight past her heavily armed enemies, rolled up inside a carpet, and dramatically unrolled right at Caesar's feet. Talk about an entrance! It was a brilliant, highly theatrical move that instantly won him over. They forged an ironclad alliance that didn't just secure her power, it had massive political consequences. It gave her the backing she needed to push through powerful economic and trade reforms to govern Egypt effectively. A real game-changer.
Now, look at how rapidly her world, and honestly the entire ancient world around her, starts to shift. In 48 BC, she meets Caesar and secures her throne. Then, jump ahead to 41 BC. This is years after Caesar's brutal assassination, and she meets Mark Antony, forging a legendary new partnership. But then things rapidly, dangerously accelerate toward 31 BC and the devastating Battle of Actium. The stakes in this game escalate in the blink of an eye.
Chapter 4. The War for Empire. Because this famous romance with Mark Antony, it wasn't just some tragic love story. It was a massive, high-stakes political ambition that sparked a furious public reaction back in Rome. And it triggered a conflict that simply could not be stopped.
Long before any swords were drawn, the war of words began, and it was intense. On one side, you have Egypt, celebrating Cleopatra as a literal divine ruler, a fierce protector of the East who was bringing stability and vast wealth alongside Antony. But on the exact opposite side, over in Rome, Octavian launched a highly orchestrated, incredibly hostile propaganda campaign in the Senate. He vilified her. He painted her as this dangerous, foreign sorceress who had somehow corrupted a true Roman general. Now, we aren't taking sides here, but the absolute night-and-day contrast between the fierce loyalty of Alexandria and the rising toxic hostility of Rome completely set the stage for all-out war.
And all of that tension finally boiled over right here. The Battle of Actium. I want you to imagine the chaotic, deafening roar of crashing timber, the shouts of thousands of men, the dark waters of the Mediterranean just churning. This was the epic, make-or-break naval showdown between the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra, going right up against the cold, highly calculated fleet of Octavian.
But strategic mistakes were made. Whether it was a critical miscommunication, a terrible lapse in positioning, or just a sudden, cruel change in the winds of war, the tactical errors out there on the water that day were absolutely crushing. Everything they had built, all of their towering political ambitions, unraveled in a matter of hours.
The fleet was destroyed. It is a sudden, cinematic devastation. With their massive ships burning and sinking into the sea, Antony and Cleopatra's military power completely collapsed. Just gone. They were forced to flee back to Egypt, knowing full well that the end was rapidly approaching.
Which brings us into the tragic final act, Chapter 5, Death and Iconic Legacy. We are retreating now into the ancient, heavy atmosphere of Alexandria. The golden hour has long passed. Octavian's forces are closing in fast, and there is literally nowhere left to run.
Those final days unfolded in a rapid, devastating sequence. Step 1. The military defeated Actium officially sealed their fate. Then, in the sheer chaos that followed, Antony, who mistakenly believed Cleopatra was already dead, tragically took his own life. The heartbreak of that moment forced her final, ultimate decision. She was surrounded, defeated, and absolutely refusing to be paraded through the streets of Rome as a captured prisoner. So Cleopatra took absolute control of her final moments on Earth.
But how exactly did she do it? Well, this is where modern historical debates still rage. On the one hand, we have the legendary, highly dramatic snakebite theory. You know the one, an asp smuggled into her heavily guarded chambers hidden inside a basket of figs. It's incredibly poetic and it's deeply, deeply tied to Egyptian mythology. But then on the other hand, we have the poison theory. And honestly, a lot of modern historians argue this is way more likely. A lethal cocktail of fast-acting toxins, perhaps kept hidden inside a hollow hairpin. But you know what? Regardless of the exact method, her death was her final, ultimate act of defiance.
And that defiance cemented a legacy that forever changed history. Her death didn't just mean the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It marked the absolute, final end of ancient Egypt as an independent power. From that moment on, it became just another province of Rome. And for Rome, her defeat gave Octavian the ultimate, undisputed power he needed to completely reshape the Republic into the Roman Empire, eventually crowning himself Augustus. She remains an ultimate historical icon today because her life and her death literally turned the page of world history.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Just imagine, for a second, if the winds at Actium had blown differently. If she had actually won that war, how would history have remembered Cleopatra? Would she be known not as some tragic romantic figure, but as the supreme, undisputed architect of a brand new global empire? It completely changes how you view her, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the past, and I will see you next time.